The 360 on Energy and Carbon, hosted by 360 Energy. When it comes to utility data, there's a common misconception that it's fixed and beyond your control. However, that's far from the truth. 360 Energy has created an innovative AI-powered platform designed to simplify and automate the complex process of energy and emissions data management. Introducing Envirely. Envirely provides organizations with a comprehensive solution enabling efficient management of energy usage, cost reduction, and greenhouse gas emissions reduction in alignment with global standards. Welcome back, Dave and John.
It is a pleasure to be back. Lysandra, nice to have you back again. John and I took care of our last podcast, as you'll find out very quickly.
Yeah, it's good to be back. I would want to say we struggled without you, but we didn't struggle, but I don't know how well we did.
I'm nervous. I'm nervous for you both. Well, we're welcomed today by an excellent guest. Today we're joined by Stephane Germain, founder and CEO at GHG Sat. Welcome.
Thank you. We're glad to be here.
On today's episode, we're diving into the technology and impact of GHG Sat. To start us off, how did GHG Sat come about? And what was your pathway to becoming CEO?
Well, I've been looking for a number of years to be an entrepreneur. I had a career in the aerospace business, and I always had a passion for the environment. And I was really looking at that intersection, thinking I had this urge, this desire to do something entrepreneurial. And I was looking for something that would allow me to scratch the itch in space and scratch the itch in the environment. And then there was, as these things tend to happen, there was a classic light bulb moment where there was an announcement between the governments of California and Quebec, where I'm from, of a cap and trade scheme. So basically putting a price on a ton of carbon. And that woke me up to what had woken thousands of people up before me, that when you put a price on a ton of carbon, put a price on emissions, people are going to care about how much they're emitting. And I thought, well, wow, what if we could measure this, not just estimate it, but measure it directly now, so there's no ambiguity, and offer that as a service at the cheapest possible way to deliver it anywhere around the world, anywhere in the US, anywhere in Canada, as quickly, accurately. Would people buy that? And sure enough, I started with a whole bunch of customer calls. I wanted to make sure that I wasn't kind of, thinking my own idea was great. I wanted to go make sure people would actually buy this. And after well over 100 interviews, almost every single one said, first of all, hey, that's really cool. And second of all, yeah, I absolutely would buy it if it worked. And they're all pretty skeptical that it would work. But that was the start. It was it was me wanting to scratch that entrepreneurial itch. I had the background in space, I had the passion for the environment, and wanted to pull it all together. And since I was employee number one, I nominated myself CEO, and here we are.
Well, that's one way to become CEO, isn't it?
That's right. Found your own company.
Yeah. Okay, so we've got that. My question's the sort of real 101 starter question on all of this, and it's how does GHG Sat measure greenhouse gas emissions from space and with such precision? So how does it work?
Well, all right, so just the basics of atmospheric science. I'll try to distill this down to something that's relatable. So every gas in the atmosphere absorbs light at specific wavelengths, and it's like a spectral fingerprint. Methane has this light absorption pattern. Carbon dioxide has a light absorption pattern. Nitrogen, all these other gases have. So if you know where light will be absorbed, if you could invent an instrument that would go look at those absorption lines, those specific wavelengths for the absorption, and basically count molecules. Sounds kind of crazy, but look at how much light is absorbed at a particular wavelength. It turns out that the amount of gas present is proportional to the absorption. So we use this great big energy source called the sun, and the sun reflects radiation off the ground. It bounces back towards space. And if there happens to be gas between the ground and space where my detector is, well, there'll be light absorbed if the gas is present. So we're basically looking for the absorption of light at that location corresponding to the presence of the gas. So that's the theory. So, the short version of all that is we invented an instrument very specifically to do that. We spoke to our customers. They told us what they would need for this to be useful to them. It has to be able to see individual facilities. It has to be able to see small enough leaks. It has to be accurate. It has to be validated. And yeah, if you want to do that from space, knock yourself out and show us you can do it. And that's what we did. So we invented an instrument specifically to address that need.
That is particularly interesting because one of my follow-ups was going to be, and you've answered it, that you can be precise to a given site, precise location.
That's right. And we can be accurate. And what's really different from what used to be done, I mean, everything in the world of emissions monitoring or gas monitoring, it's not just emissions or greenhouse gases, it's also like things like air quality or smoke or odor. A lot of it has just been estimates where you look at this very theoretical model and say, well, it's, there's these things called Gaussian plume models, which sounds really fancy, but it's a simplified approximation of where the gas should go and at what concentrations. They're as good as we could do, but it's not a measurement. So what we set out to do is a measurement.
Does your technology, does it discriminate between the different GHGs?
Yes, absolutely. We measure individual gases.
This is really interesting because when we talk to people generally about measurement of GHGs, we have to say in most of the methods that are used, we can't directly measure them because we're working from a proxy such as energy use and an emissions factor and so on, which can be reasonably accurate. But then you have to say on some things, and I mean, going back to the oil and gas industry, flaring and venting from that industry, you can maybe measure it, but you're not really sure. You might not be measuring it. So this is really interesting technology. Thank you. Yeah.
And the devil's in the details, because even things that you think would be relatively straightforward, like, for example, a power plant that burns oil. And you burn oil to turn an engine and generate power. The oil has different grades, has different sources. Some come from one country, another batch comes from another country, and they're going to burn with different efficiencies and different impurities, which means you're going to have different emissions coming out of the smokestack. So you can use these generalized estimates that your average fuel burned for X period of time will give you Y amount of carbon dioxide, but there's always significant variations in that, and that's a simple case. Like you said, flaring and venting and all kinds of complex processes from literally millions of different production points or facilities. It's really hard to track all that stuff and estimate it clearly.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm going to ask my next question, but I'll have a follow-up based on what you just said there, Stephane. So what really makes your technology different from the traditional estimate models per se? I know you covered a bit, but like if you can give a little more detail to our listeners so they understand.
Sure. So I think John said it well. The estimates are really designed to be proxies for what is actually going on. You can't always know the direct quantity of carbon dioxide coming out of your chimney or a quantity of methane coming out of an unlit flare. You have to kind of look at the process data you've got and say, well, if I think I collected this amount at the well and I only see this amount in the pipeline, one minus the other must be what disappeared somewhere. And therefore, we're estimating that our total emission was that gap between the two. And that's rife with uncertainty. And what we've discovered is that when you measure things directly, you can often get, a 1.5 to 2x higher actual emissions than what was estimated. And by the way, this is where human nature comes in too, which is important to keep in mind in all this. When you're asked by your boss to estimate what the nasty stuff coming out of your production is, you're not going to start with the worst case. You're going to take the most generous assumptions that are reasonable within the rules of what you're allowed to do, and you're going to come up with a number that makes you look as good as possible. Of course. Well, that's why when you measure it, it's different than what you estimate, right? So that's what we do. Fundamentally, the technology allows us to measure directly and right at the facility level. So it's not looking at a mishmash of all your facilities in an oil and gas production area. You see what every single one is doing at the moment that we measure it. And that allows you to have some really precise and useful and actionable data.
So I want to follow up on that. So is it a continuous measurement process, or is it random sampling that you do over a period of time and then you make calculations for the year or something like that?
That's a really important point. So it is statistical sampling, and it is, I'd say it's pseudo-random. It's not like 100% random. But yeah, we will go over, take a snapshot measurement, and then we'll go over with another satellite at a different semi-random time and take another snapshot measurement. And then we'll combine all those. When we get really sophisticated, we'll compare those to production timings as well, and be able to come up with ultimately it is still an estimate based on the measurements, but you're at least you're grounding it in that indirect measurements.
And does, for example, cloud cover or smoke from fires have a negative impact for you to be able to measure this type of activity?
Yeah, so every direct measurement has its limitations, as do ours, right?
Sure.
So the things that affect us are, first of all, daylight. I mentioned earlier that we have this great big energy source called the sun. Yeah. So we can't measure at night, right? The other thing is if you happen to be in northern latitudes, like where I live in the winter in Quebec or in Canada, it gets a little dark. So, you can't measure in the late afternoon in northern latitudes, or same thing in southern latitudes in their winter. So there's latitudes, there's high winds, like if you're in the middle of a hurricane. Well, first of all, it's going to be cloudy, but second of all, even if you were in the eye of the hurricane or something, well, actually, it's quite that. Anyway, look, high winds is another one that dilutes the plume. So your molecules get kind of spread out really, really quickly, and you can't really get any decent concentrations. So there's lots of different things that would affect the quality of the measurement. But, we have enough opportunities that we get some pretty good statistical samples, and we know what affects and doesn't affect our measurements.
So you can measure emission output. I'm pretty sure this is not possible, but can you measure emission? Like, you can tell by different forestry what is CO2 is being consumed?
Yeah, I wish.
Wouldn't that be a wonderful thing? Yeah.
Well, actually, there's some people who do that in a different way, and they go back to what John was saying, use proxies.
Right.
But no, so look, again, instruments, we purpose designed our instrument to measure industrial emissions from facilities. What we can't do is look at absorption or the lack of carbon dioxide, the removal of carbon dioxide because of a forest. We can't even look at emissions from large areas. Like, people have asked us, can you see methane from melting permafrost? And the answer is no, because that's significant. There's huge areas of permafrost in Canada, in Russia, and other northern latitudes that are starting to melt and releasing methane that could really have an impact on climate models. You have to be able to measure over large areas, and we're designed to look over individual facilities.
Got it.
There's always pros and cons to different technologies. We're really all about helping industrial operators take actionable decisions on the machines and the facilities that they're operating.
Okay, excellent. Is that feedback fairly quick when you're doing it?
Yeah. So this is all a question of what the customer's willing to pay, because we could have it near instantaneous if that was really, really important. Sure. But we would have to get a lot fancier in how we do it. The simple answer is right now, our standard service is about 24 hours to get the data from the satellite into the customer's hands. We have an accelerated service. We can do it within 6 hours. If we wanted to, it could be near instantaneous. Everything's from the satellite through the processing, through delivery to the customers, all cloud-based and APIs and all that stuff. So it could be really, really fast, but there's an extra cost to that at this point, no customer has really felt the need to ask us to put in place.
Makes sense. So follow-up then is, who are the type of clients that you have, the industries? You don't need to give names of customers, but industry sectors that you're working with.
So it's pretty simple. You start by looking at the global inventories of greenhouse gases, and you look at the largest sources, and that's who we went to knock on their doors. That's where we went to knock on their doors. And so the first and largest industrial source, and actually then you need to split between carbon dioxide and methane. Sure. And we made a conscious decision that we would start with methane instead of carbon dioxide. Yeah. And I can get into that in a minute, but let me answer your question. So for methane, it starts with agriculture. And you might say, agriculture, what's going on there? Well, it turns out that every bit of livestock that chews grass and vegetables basically emit methane. And they emit tiny little bits of methane, but when you jam like 10,000 of them into a feedlot, they emit a lot of methane, right? Yes. So agriculture, then the second one is oil and gas. Then the third one is waste and wastewater, so solid and liquid waste. And the next one after that is mining, coal mining in particular. And then there's a whole bunch of others, but that gives you an idea.
Wow.
So we then went to each one of those and said, okay, where is there a business case where if you had our data, you could either make more money because instead of wasting your gas, you could sell it, or where could you reduce your costs because we could offer you a cheaper way to keep track of your emissions, and then you can comply with regulations and everything else. Or we can help you get it comply with your own internal standards for reducing your greenhouse gas emissions, or for health and safety reasons, we can mitigate gas in constrained areas, things like that. And we went through all the parameters, and basically the largest commercial customer segment for us is oil and gas, followed by waste. And you'd be amazed, actually, how much the waste industry has a lot of opportunity in measuring and then capturing and selling their gas that is produced at their landfills. So landfills are, a lot of people think of landfills as just piles of trash. It's way more sophisticated than that. And I've learned that over the years. There's a lot of technology that goes into that. And if you're managing them actively, there's a lot of science that goes into what you extract from them, how do you help them decompose faster, how you manage both the odors and the fluids coming from that so it doesn't impinge on neighboring communities. I mean, it's not perfect. There's obviously issues. It's a low margin business, and so there's always trade-offs. But they're really actively managing this and seeing the opportunity in it.
Last one, because is there regulating bodies that ever ask you, third-party regulating bodies that ask you to check customers' numbers?
Yes. So we work, first and foremost, we try to work as trusted partners with the operators because, it's a bit of a philosophical point, but it's also a practical point. Ultimately, we're a private company. We want to make money, but we also want to do good. So we have that combined goal of wanting to help fight climate, but at the same time make money. And we found that our interests are best aligned with being trusted partners to the operators, because ultimately, if you're working with them in a trusted way, they're the ones that own the valves and the pumps and who are going to fix things, directly. And so the impact that we're having, the gas that is being captured and sold or mitigated, we're helping directly influence with the people who control it every day. So we start with them, but we also sell to governments. And we've made it clear to everybody, our data is for sale. We will not make it public because we want to work as a trusted partner, but it's for sale to anybody, including governments. So to answer your question, when a regulator wants to know what's going on in their jurisdiction, sure, they can buy our data. The interesting little wrinkle in that, though, is that usually the standards that industrial operators are held to are much more stringent than what we can see from space. Like we can only see big stuff from space. I mean, at the end of the day, we're pretty far away, and we see egregious, significant leaks or large emissions. So the regulators try to be a lot tighter in their regulations in that. So we're not generally used for compliance. They don't use us to assess penalties. What they do is use us to understand what's the general state, what's the situational awareness of my jurisdiction. Where are there emissions where I didn't know there were emissions? Or, are there trends, there are decreasing trends in large emissions that I know should be happening because I'm working with Joe at that plant over there and he told me he was going to fix it. Yeah, the emissions are going down, right? So that kind of thing is absolutely being done by federal, state, and municipal governments.
Okay. Thank you.
You've touched on industries with the most detectable emissions. Can you share some case studies where detection led to actual mitigation?
Yeah, so I can give you maybe two or three. Let's talk about the U.S. first, and then we'll talk internationally. The nice thing about satellites is they literally see the whole world, right? So I can give you a few examples internationally as well. But in the U.S., one of my favorite ones is we are working with an oil and gas operator in Texas, and the operator said, hey, why don't you go take a look at this gas plant over here and tell us what you see. It was a bit of a pilot. They wanted to see if we could. They were permitted to do, they knew they had process emissions, which are normal, and they were allowed to emit this, and they were declaring it. It was all perfectly normal and above board. And they were kind of testing us to see, okay, can they really see what they say they can see? So we go measure this thing, and it turns out the emissions are 3 times bigger than what the operator thought they were. And the operator was like, well, clearly you're wrong. And we said, no, I don't think we are. So we went and measured it again and again and again. And finally, the operator said, okay, I'm going to go measure this thing on the ground. And sure enough, their emissions were 3 times higher than they thought they were. And the reason is because the facility as built was built differently than as designed. They made a mistake in the construction. The repair cost $300,000, which is not nothing. It's a lot of money. But it allowed them to generate millions of dollars of additional gas sales per year from this facility. So that won us a fan for a long time, right? It was a great example of completely rational, everything made sense, but there was a discrepancy that had people scratching their heads saying, what's going on? And it was a beautiful validation of the technology that also saved a lot of money and saved gas for the environment. That's one. Another one I'd tell you is in the US, there are in different states, federally in different states, there's a series of regulations. And there are these programs called leak detection and repair programs that need to be put in place. And so we've been working with several different oil and gas operators to do satellite measurements as part of a portfolio of technologies they use to monitor all their facilities. So there's a few operators that I won't name them, but they probably wish I would, because they're doing a really interesting job. They're taking all these different technologies, bringing into a central room. And in this room, it's like mission control at NASA. You have screens everywhere. You have data inputs coming from all over the place. And you have these operators who are like, the guys who've been there, done that. The people who've been in the field, who've seen all these situations. And when they see the data going, they go, oh, yeah, I know what's going on here. And I know what's going on there. And what's the satellite saying? Oh, yeah, that correlates and it makes sense. That's something we need to go fix right now. Or they'll say, that's Joe with his truck again. He turned the wrench the wrong way. Damn it. And he'll call Joe and say, Joe, turn the wrench the other way. And, that's fixed, then it's all over. So there's having this sort of central mission control and using satellites to help fix your big leaks fast has turned out to be a really cost-effective way for some of the large operators to get at the gas that they would rather sell than vent to the atmosphere. So that's the second one. I'll give you one more, and this is the international one. So we have been working with different oil and gas groups to get the word out to the rest of the world that we are on a daily basis seeing emissions everywhere. And there are places in Central Asia and the Middle East. Central Asia in particular has a lot of emissions. It's old Soviet infrastructure that's all kind of rusting and falling apart. And a lot of these countries aren't necessarily very rich, and they really rely on their oil and gas revenue. So the priority is just produce, and if it vents, well, whatever, we'll get to that later. And so we've been working to, first of all, get some data to these operators to say, look, I get it, your GDP and feeding your people is more important, but I mean, come on, this is a no-brainer right here. And we will bring in our buddies from the oil and gas industry who'll say, in confidence, just between us, here's how we fixed it. And by the way, you'll make more money because instead of letting that vent, you'll be able to sell it. And so it'll be a net positive for you. You'll actually make money by repairing this. And so we've had a couple of examples of that where we've saved huge amounts of gas by pointing it out to them first, bringing our oil and gas from friends in to do technology transfer, which is a fancy way of saying, show them how it's done, and then getting it repaired. And it's been really successful.
Okay. So a real key question is how do you verify the accuracy of your readings?
Very important. It goes back to the very beginning of the story for me when I went to people and tested the market to say, hey, if I could do this in space, would you buy it? And they all kind of laughed and said, sure, Stephane, yeah. If if you can do that, we'll buy it. I just don't think you'll ever do it. And so a large part of that is, well, proving that it actually works. How do you verify that your measurement is accurate and precise? Because those are separate but related concepts.
Absolutely, yes.
And so the short answer is we do these things called controlled releases. And that means that we have a known source on the ground emitting at we know where it is and we know how big it is. And we also have an anemometer, a wind meter nearby that tells us exactly what the wind speed and wind direction is when we release the gas. And then we see what the satellite says and we compare the two. And so we do that ourselves. We do it with third-party academic institutions. So Stanford, for example, has been a real leader in this in the US. We do this with national agencies. So in the US, we've had NASA thoroughly review our data. And in fact, it was like 8 different principal investigators, which is the jargon for lead scientists in 8 different disciplines ripping apart our data. And then in Europe, we've had the European Space Agency do the same thing. In fact, the Europeans were first and NASA did it second. And finally, we've got our customers themselves who've decided to test at their own gas facilities. That took years, but doing all of that, not just once, but repeatedly, and demonstrating that we're still precise, we're still accurate, and most importantly, we're still the best in terms of the lowest detection threshold. You can see the smallest leaks. That is gold. It's absolutely critical for your credibility.
Yeah, that's so true. I just want to reflect back on some couple of things that you've said from my experience with oil and gas, and it makes perfect sense because one of the short-term targets that most of the oil majors have is the reduction of methane emissions. One of the arguments is, and I'm going to be slightly off here, one of the arguments is, it's a really important gas. It's about 28 times more powerful than CO2, but it is also something that can give you revenue. And often it's wasted product that is coming from the oil and gas industry. And you were
Exactly.
talking about leak detection and repair, which is a major aspect with most of the oil majors as well. And in fact, some of them, and again, I'm in the same position as you, I'm not going to name names, but the idea of zero flaring, zero venting, only into, these are all protocols that they're trying to do. But as you say, in a global oil company, you may have one of your subsidiary companies saying, yeah, we're doing everything. But you need a way of perhaps checking on that. So I guess that's another.
Good verification process.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and there's just a lot of human nature in this too.
Oh,
The
yeah.
if you could have the best technology in the world, you hand it to an operator in the U.S., you hand it to an operator in Australia, you hand it to an operator in Nigeria, you hand it to an operator in Kazakhstan,
Yeah.
and you're going to get four answers,
Yeah.
four different answers, right? Because they're all going to do it their own way, even if they have the same training, because we're
Yeah.
humans, right?
Yeah.
And so there's that. There's also the human nature of a bit what you just said. The culture in the U.S. may be profit, profit, profit. This is how it's going to work. Culture in another part of the world might be, feed my people. I'll get to your profit. And, there's going to be different, even within the same corporate structure. How do you motivate literally hundreds of thousands of people to all care all of a sudden about methane? It's a change in culture that takes years. And the oil and gas industry went through it a decade or two ago when it came to safety. There was this seminal moment in the oil and gas industry where they decided there would be zero accidents would become the culture. It was no longer acceptable for people to die in working for a company. Sounds obvious now. It wasn't so obvious in the 1960s or 1950s, right? And so they're trying to do the same thing for methane, to say that it's money and it's about the climate and it's about our corporate citizenship. We need to do this. And at the same time, it allows us to make more money. So it's the right thing to do. And it just is all about a corporate culture shift. And that's really not obvious. It takes a lot of time and a lot of dedication to get that human element to back all these efforts.
Yeah, I think the other thing as well with methane is that there are things that can be done within, how shall I put this, the current CEO's term of office, whereas net zero may be outside that term of office. So again, yeah.
Yes. So I could tell you stories there. I'll just, Chatham House rules. I won't name anybody, but I got to tell a quick little anecdote. I was at an offsite meeting of some senior executives from, it actually wasn't oil, it was coal. And I remember one of them simply saying, absolutely, I'll sign up to net zero because, hey, I'll be dead by then anyway. So it's not a problem.
We've heard
and
that.
I just sat back and
Quite
I was
often,
like, okay, dude, I get it, but let's see if we can change that attitude.
Yeah.
A similar one I had last week is somebody was talking about it and said, well, I think that's beyond my retirement glide path.
Yeah, that's right. No, look, one thing I've been very encouraged to see in a lot of the industrial operators I've been working with, because again, we work as trusted partners, right? So, and because I'm not naming names here, I don't have to be nice, but I would say that vast majority, easily 75% of the people I talk to really want to play the long game. It's not about being nice. Yeah. It's about the fact that there's a tailwind to this thing. Climate change is happening. I think there's very few people that debate that there is climate change going on. Maybe we'll all dispute how fast it's going on, the effects it will have, how bad it will be for region A versus region B. But there are changes going on. And as a result, like it or not, politics will, over the long term, trend towards more regulation or at least controlling or bounding this stuff. And so when you're a business and you're all about making profit and managing risks, you are going to look not to a single administration's decisions. You're going to look at the long-term trend, especially if you've got a large business, has hundreds of thousands of facilities, and it takes tens of millions and hundreds of millions of dollars to roll out programs over multiple years. You are going to set yourself a path, and you're going to try to find the middle of the road between the extremes and the political vagaries of the day. And you're going to aim for that and try to be consistent so it can be done efficiently at the lowest cost possible for mitigating your risks. And that's just business. And that's how these people think. And to me, it's not a question of being religious about climate or absolutely wanting to hit net zero targets. It's about running a good business. And it just makes sense. And I think the better operators totally get that and are on it immediately.
Now, I've got a question here that about 14 megatons of CO2 equivalent mitigated. Where does this come from and what does it look like?
Yeah, that's quite a mouthful, isn't it? So first of all, it's not, the number's up to 20 now.
Oh, right.
And yeah, so 20 million tons. So first of all, that's a really abstract concept. You talked about tons of gas. Like, how do you put a weight on gas? Gas is kind of this whimsical stuff that's all around us that we breathe. It doesn't have mass. Well, actually, it does have mass. And millions of tons of gas is like a lot. You need to translate it into something that you can relate to every day. And there's this wonderful website. It's actually run by the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency in the United States. And it's called the EPA Greenhouse Gas Calculator. It's online. I encourage you to go take a look. I use it literally every other day because it's a good objective reference. And if you plug in 20 million into the emissions of carbon dioxide, it tells you that that's the equivalent of, and I'll just read it to make sure I get it right, 4.7 million gasoline-powered passenger vehicles driven for 1 year. So that's kind of precise wording. 4.7 million cars taken off the road for a year. Think about that. That's the equivalent of like the 10th largest city in the US no longer using cars for an entire year. That's what 20 million tons mitigated means. So it's not insignificant. That's a lot.
And for your customers, Stephane, that's a lot of money.
Yeah,
That's
absolutely.
a lot of money.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay, I want to ask a supplementary that you might choose not to work with, or we might not. You've been talking quite a bit about the US and climate change, and we're all aware that funding appears to be being withdrawn from certain climate change activities in the US.
Yep.
Is that going to have an impact on you?
Sure. It goes back to that long game I was talking about earlier. In the short term, it does. There are agencies that were buying from us that all of a sudden can't speak the word climate.
Yeah.
Right? There are other agencies internationally that are stepping in to fill the gap. That are saying, okay, well, look, we still think this is important, and we're continuing our funding, and we're actually going to increase our funding. So, there's, first of all, there's geographic differences, and it puts and takes geographically. But second of all, this long game, we've signed our largest contracts ever this year with industrial operators in the U.S.
Oh, that's good.
Even with this new approach towards
climate negative, should we say? Climate negative.
Your words, not mine. But anyway, suffice it to say, there are people who are afraid to put their heads above the parapet in the U.S., right? And that's understandable.
Understandable.
Yeah. So I think it goes back to the trusted approach. We're not about making headlines. We're not about shaming people publicly. And in the same ways, we're not about shaming. We're not about, trumpeting the massive wins in the climate either. What matters to us is that our customers know we exist and we can help them run their businesses better, make more money, and reduce their costs. And we can do that entirely privately. And ultimately, that's good for their businesses, and that's what really matters. And from a government's point of view, we don't allow them to publish the data we generate publicly. They're only allowed to use it privately. Right. So again, for them, it allows them to have a sense of what's going on. And believe it or not, most governments actually prefer to work with the operators in their jurisdictions in a friendly way for as long as possible until things really go off the rails.
Yeah.
Why? Because it's much more productive, right? If you can get along with people who are creating jobs in your jurisdiction, that's a lot better than trying to fight with each other openly, unless you're trying to win some political points, which is a different issue. So a lot of the bureaucrats, a lot of the administrators in government are happy to get the data to understand, just understand what's going on. And we, again, require them to keep it private. It's not a ask, it's a requirement.
Okay.
I think it really reinforces, Stephane, what you're saying, that a lot of customers, big corporations are playing the long game, and that they realize that political administrations change.
That's right.
So Stephane, what's the next GHG Sat technology, including upcoming launches?
So I'm not going to tell you much about the technology. I'll just say, we're always innovating, and that's our job as a technology company, is to always be the best in the world, and we are, and we will continue to be. So stay tuned. Yeah. But on the launches, that I can tell you about, we just launched 2 more satellites in June. We have 2 more launching before the end of the calendar year in 2025. We have another 4 more launching next year in 2026. So we have satellites going all the time. The constellation's growing, it's getting better. Like any technology, think about your iPhone, think about your Pixel, think about, your computer. It always gets better every year or every 2 years. So do ours, right? So this is a technology that's getting better, going to be around. And because this is proven to be such an interesting market, we've attracted competitors. I see that as a sign of success. I love competition. Bring it on. And, I think it'll be better for everybody at the end of the day. So I think there's good things to come.
Stephane, we've covered the technology, your clients, and the real world impact GHG Sat is having Before we wrap up, what's the biggest takeaway you'd like our listeners to walk away with from today's conversation?
Probably just on an optimistic note here, there is a huge opportunity for operators, for governments, and even for us individuals to both make money and do good. I think we can really address core issues about greenhouse gas emissions in a very pragmatic, practical, profitable way that at the same time, reduces risks for the environment. So I'm really enthusiastic for the future. I think there's a great opportunity in front of us, and we're looking forward to being at the forefront of it.
Thanks for that. John, what's your biggest takeaway?
We always talk about in energy and carbon management how it's built on a foundation of data. And I think what we're being presented here is with another really innovative and valuable tool in the data toolbox.
Dave, what's your biggest takeaway?
Lysandra, I want to be cheeky and say we need more than 20 minutes to do a podcast. That would be the first takeaway. But coming back to, I want to reinforce what Stephane's saying. When you do this game, when you're involved in managing energy, carbon, methane, there's profitability built into this. There's motivation to do this because you can make your company better and more profitable. And I think he conveyed that quite clearly.
My biggest takeaway, so one of my favorite quotes, I work in project management, is every system is perfectly designed to get the results it gets. However, systems aren't perfectly designed. And I know that we've talked about that throughout today's episode. So you can gather your data and you can estimate, but really until you measure, you don't really know what you're dealing with. So I think that was my biggest takeaway from today. All right, Dave, John, Stephane, thanks for a great episode.
Really enjoyed it.
Thanks everyone.
That's all for today's episode of the 360 on Energy and Carbon podcast. Thanks for listening. Make sure to check us out on our website at 360energy.net and follow us on LinkedIn at 360energy Inc. Tune in to our podcast on Apple Music, Spotify, Anchor, or other listening platforms by searching the 360 on Energy and Carbon. You can watch the video recording and subscribe on YouTube at 360energy Inc. Email us your feedback at podcast@360energy.net or comment on our LinkedIn posts. See you next week.